All right, so we're back with Abbey and Margo from Do Not Research, which, yeah, you're going to explain what exactly it is, right? Wait, I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit so we're sure we can hear you. Yeah, so whenever you're ready, yeah, we can start.
All right, great. Is the audio okay?
Yeah, this is fine.
Excellent. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Sjef, for letting us for inviting us to this. It's been really great so far. We're happy to take a part of it. I'm Margo. That's Abby. Together we are co-directors along with Joshua Citarella, who is present in the middle of that image there. We are co-directors of Do Not Research, which is like an online art and politics community. We're a publication, or a various network of like podcasts and Twitch streams and things like that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give like a kind of broader history of the project with some like history of my like personal engagement with it, and then Abby's going to jump in, give us a more zoomed in history of our actual doings as a group, and then we're going to run you through some of the work we've put out. Just to get started, first I just want to say that I'm a bit young to be at the forefront of a project deserving any kind of like critical introspection, like at least in the context of the art world. I haven't yet finished university, and I've never been outside of my home country, nor have I even been on an airplane. So it is very strange to be talking to you, art world insiders or foreigners across the sea from my vantage about anything. But frankly, in the context of online political discourse, a space that our project attempts to blend some aspects of the art world, I'm a bit too old to be wielding any influence at all. The landscape has changed a bit in recent years, but for as long as the internet has had any effect on the culture war, young people, mid-teens and younger, have constituted both the avant-garde and the rank and file. You can see here there's two pictures. One is of Vivian James, who is like the weird anthropomorphized Gamergate mascot that 4chan developed. And the other picture is of a small graph from Joshua Citarella's 20 interviews, where he interviewed a bunch of different like young online political influencers. And this graph shows the sort of demographics. It shows how young most of these people were when they started getting engaged with online political rhetoric. And for most of my life, I belonged to the latter group. I wasn't really involved in producing the online political content, but I did consume a lot of it. Like when I was 15 years old and young and lonely and impressionable, I was like watching Gamergate grow around me as I contributed likes and laughs and crude comments. And just a year later, I was on obscure leftist boards, watching the online culture wars get meta for the first time, anonymous anarchists and communists debating propaganda techniques on forums. And a few years later, I just gave up on politics entirely. I, of course, watched the massive online coalition that fueled Trump not only produce something that was divisive and impactful and terrible, but also produce something that ultimately entirely failed them. In a lot of respects, Trump wasn't very different from past presidents in terms of like actual violence done to migrants and to people in foreign countries and wars. So he wasn't distinctly terrible, and he certainly didn't get the jobless Midwesterners their jobs back, nor did he get the alt-right gamers and NEETs out of their basements. So he largely failed the groups that brought him into power. Anyway, after that point, as I began to feel that the mimetic power of the internet ultimately fed back into the stultifying American political process, which funnels energy back into the two-party system, I got into art and literature for totally different private reasons. But regardless, over time, the political charge of some of that art brought me back into politics, which ultimately brought me here, now one of the forward guards I once observed so keenly. So we just have a couple images here, various different online political efforts of very varying degrees of success and opinions. Part of the DNR project is the recognition that as artists in the 21st century, we are also inevitably content producers. And the 21st century has, of course, made influencers of us all, but it is our hope that artists and other similarly critical and skillful types can be especially critical and rigorous influencers, untethered from the mainstream news cycle and its easy dogmatisms. But that is not the whole of our project at all. This image of the artist as foot soldier is a grim one, and if that was the whole of our work would be quite dull. We take this project of influence and resonance to be a kind of game, and we have to play it as a game, play for the joy of playing. You can compare the dull cloying of like American projects like the Lincoln Project or the sort of like worldwide vaccine influencer efforts to the frenetic tenor of the alt-right. And I think it really shows that you need to want to play this game of like mimetic warfare and influence and resonance if you're going to win it all. Like you have to enjoy it. You can't just be in it for utilitarian reasons, for instrumental reasons. So we're playing a game, all of us in this project, joined together in a sort of guild appropriately centered in the gamer chat app Discord. But as any of you who have ever been in a friend group centered around any hobby, particularly anything like a game, probably know, one remembers the friendships that formed around the game better than they do the game itself. So while we came together through the memeing of this book or that take, we come to know each other as artists and students and teachers. Our meme page and Josh's streams are our home, our central hub, and for many of our viewers or fans or whatever, that is all we are. But by fully living in this strangely public culture war, we forge relationships and moreover formulate theories and produce artworks that transcribe the boundaries of this mimetic effort. And by transcribing the boundaries, we persist beyond the culture that binds us, these private platforms that contain us and employ us, or at the very least, we point to how these things can be overcome. Because we want more than this, much more. Our project exists because institutions, the art world, universities and museums and galleries and so on, are failing the people they are supposed to serve and failing them in a world of general downward mobility, the gigification of labor and social decay. And although we dislike many of the institutions as they are now, slow and enamored with repetition, bent on amplifying the same kind of vague liberal complaints and tired political gestures for decades, we are fighting for a day in which discretion and curation can one day return to the benefit of the artist, and we can have robust institutions behind great works. So now I'm going to turn it over to Abby, who's going to give.
Hey, so I'm going to run us through a history of the project, starting with September of 2020. So artist and researcher Joshua Citarella releases his syllabus through his Patreon. By that time, a small group had already assembled watching his Monday night Twitch streams, where he would broadcast his research practice. In September, we held our first reading group. For many of us, we had already read Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. This was really an excuse to see each other's faces in a time of deep quarantine and to start building up the community. I'm happy to say that our last meeting was actually our 1-year anniversary of the reading group. So following that first meeting, Margo and I became fully immersed in leading the discussions and organizing the community. My undergrad education was falling apart and I was cruising through Zoom school, splitting my time instead between my studio practice and preparing for the reading group. Between this and Joshua Citarella's Twitch stream lectures, the community quickly established itself as a kind of peer-to-peer school for artists. The books we read opened up our political imagination and offered a name to something that I had always felt and could never articulate, a sense of capitalist realism. This term is loosely defined as the sense of defeat and inability to imagine a coherent alternative to capitalism. Books like The People's Republic of Walmart gave us a crash course in central planning, revealing for the first time to many of us the 1970s Chilean project Cybersyn. I want to pause on this because in a moment of institutional failure and a dead left, It was hard to read this book without wanting to quit everything and become a logician. In fact, much of the capital A art of our time is subordinated to something else. Artists use their flexibility to act as mediators and fundraisers, providing the care otherwise left blank by the state. And in the net art world, there's a deep suspicion of formal training of art and that the artistic traditions of the past have nothing to offer us in a world bombarded by images. So I wanted to see if we could talk about what we had learned together, and I wanted to do it as artists. So it was with this thought that we built Do Not Research. It's the front-facing publishing platform of all of the internal research and discussion and reading groups that had already been going on for months. So February comes around, we read the book Inventing the Future, which is by Nick Snirsek and Alex Williams. And it was the first moment that I had really wanted to metabolize what we had been reading and put it in, like, directly into an artwork. So hopefully, I didn't check to see if the sound was being shared. Okay, it's being shared now. So I'm gonna pause for a second and show you this video art piece that I made for Do Not Research that was supposed to live on social media.
Oh, America, you are so grand and golden. I wish I was on the next flight to America. What an army, what an air force, what a Marines, America. I never served my country. America, America. Afghanistan, Vietnam, Iran, Native America, America.
Yeah, so just to recap, that was an artwork. A lot of the text that's in the artwork were sourced from the book. And it was like almost a way of giving myself like a homework assignment around the text we were reading in the reading group, and something that would work on social media. So come the summer, the community was producing a lot, and Do Not Research became the place to draw all of our energy into one. The summer was also a turning point for what this thing could be, because it wasn't quite a magazine. When we talk about Do Not Research as a para-institutional space, it is not because we believe that these problems can only be answered by a fringe community, as many of these direct action-focused art collectives would lead us to believe. Talking to friend and community member Nate Sloan, he reminded me that the goal isn't just to disrupt, rather that the broad horizon is to disrupt in order to end the disruption that is the slow dismantling of social programs and a shift to the private sector. So here's a good place to turn to different works from our community and how art and internet culture research are being considered. This is Flip Caustic's PC Bed. It's a sculpture and a endurance-based performance piece. So the entire thing was streamed on Twitch. He stayed in his bed, surveilled for 24 hours. And it's spoken with the voice of a digital native and not an anthropologist. I love this work because he loves his computers as much as he is suspicious of the blurred line between the good screen and the bad screen and wage slave work.
Yeah, so as you all know already, we are publishing documentation of Sjef's work on our blog in the coming weeks on September 15th. I think this work is another great distillation of what we're trying to do here with regards to like internet culture and the kind of like complicated and then the kind of complicated like legacy of that, where there's this sort of like history of the deeply alienated gamer and the kind of like creepily extremely online, but there's also a kind of like beauty and optimism to the piece, this image of like the 4 keyboards speaking with one voice. So this right here is another really big moment for our group. Joshua Citarella wrote an article to be published on our blog called The Slow Red Pill, which was about, a kind of like cryptic, sneaky tactic, like right-wing meme pages and other kind of like social media personalities were using. The implicit bit of the piece was that like the left could be using these techniques as well, kind of slowly introducing people to more radical ideas with the hopes that instead of producing, something like Trump and more racism, this kind of like internet influence campaign, this kind of like mimetic warfare could, maybe help produce a movement that gives us something great, like better working conditions, like more robust social democracy in the States, healthcare and things like that. So his bid was that these strategies weren't inherently bad, weren't inherently evil. They were just discovered by, the wrong people first. They had great potential. And we had it republished by The Guardian, and there will be a few more syndicated by this publication. And what was really interesting there was the reception of the piece. I mean, especially in the comments. It's, as we probably know, mostly boomers who are like in the comments sections of these like mass publications. So it was a great learning experience to see what confused them and what ideas seemed to shock them, what ideas seemed to be out of left field. And it felt like a great victory for us to be able to take these kind of like far out or fringe ideas and really bring them into a sort of mainstream. This is another piece. It's called Doomer. Dimitri made a sort of like fan edit, like a mod of the classic game Doom. And as is probably incredibly obvious, every texture has been replaced by some kind of internet errata, like depressing memes, images of 9/11, tons of like saccharine, cutesy, pornographic anime images. I think it's a really great piece because for one thing, it really encapsulates in a really totalizing and in kind of grim way, like a very depressing part of the internet, another factor of the lives of very many alienated and extremely online people. But it also, raises it to a kind of humor that also reminds you that this kind of world is a bit of a game, it has like set parameters that one can move in and outside of. It's not like the totalizing facts of a life.
This meme might look familiar to you. It was it's another thing that came from our community that traveled really far. I remember like 2 days later, it was like all over Twitter in this way that really like surprised and pleased us. And for Nate Sloan, who was already writing a piece related to this, it was this great like proof of concept moment for kind of a deep cultural need for somebody to talk about what he calls a beyond based and cringe. So our next round of work will be published on September 15th. We publish it on donotresearch.net, and you can also find us at Do Not Research on Instagram. And I just want to give a shout out to Ian for his like beautiful like web dev work. A big shout out to Josh for his love and his experience, and the entire DNR community. And also thank you to Odd Café and Sjef for this invitation. It was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah. Great. I don't know if you were able to hear. We gave him an applause. Yeah, so I guess this is the part. Does anyone have any questions? Or is this? Yeah. Okay. We have one question from the audience. Maybe I should wait. Yeah. Just try that. Can you
hear me? Hello, testing.
Oh, this is good.
Okay. How do you think like the intellectual, artistic side of shit posting and meme culture that's spread so far coincides, aligns, or maybe like contrasts with like, I don't know, schizo posting, like anti-doomer, but like anarcho, fucking Ted Kaczynski Unabomber kind of shit.
Is it okay if I go first? It's interesting. I mean, I think there's equal parts in intelligence and craziness to all of that. I mean, it's certainly not an optimistic or frankly actionable political program. The kind of like schizo outlook is putting forward. However, I mean, these like bizarre expressions come out of like very real and difficult situations, a lot of like complex like political problems that are unvoiced and that can sometimes only be voiced in these really fugitive and bizarre ways. So I think if somebody has like a concerted project where they're trying to turn this internet energy into something that's like coherent and actionable, there can be a lot of friction there between the kind of like aesthetics and community that center around like a kind of like craziness and a kind of oppressive fugitivity. However, that it's also great proof that like the problems of like downward mobility and a kind of like social alienation and fears about the environment are like incredibly real. So it's a fine line you have to cross between like giving voice to some of those expressions without adopting the kind of like implicit nihilism or the sort of like reactionary romanticism of many of those positions. It's a fine line.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would add is like that there's like a lot of vitality to the schizo posting that we should keep. And maybe it actually shouldn't be coherent because it's shit posting, to do anything else would be to be like a Philistine. So I think be glad that we have it and try and channel it in a productive way, as Margo said.
I agree 100%. Awesome.
Yeah, can you hear me as well? Okay, cool. First of all, thank you for giving us an insight into your community, like-minded people. With that said, what struck me was that you mentioned that getting into the Guardian was like a kind of victory for the community. Getting into a distribution channel that was for a broader public and perhaps more mainstream. So in some sense, you do seem to subscribe to the hierarchy of distribution channels. And doesn't it make more sense for you to invest in your community as a close-knit group on a separate channel on the internet? What delivers you more in sense of intellectual depth or progress in the movement you're into?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really like a business question. Like it's important to us to have some like a front-facing outlet for this work, because we don't want it to die with us. I mean, there's that's one part of it. A lot of it is also handled by Josh. He runs those relations, and as we were kind of organically building up this project, it was very important that things like the reading group would be like the farthest upstream and the most close-knit, and that we wouldn't rule out any possible channels.
Yeah, I guess To add, I don't really see those efforts like at odds. We are like the products of the community, we hope have great visibility, but the community itself, we much prefer being kind of cloistered, as Abby said, kind of upstream from the content and the content's reception. That very much, like the reason why people like enjoy the DIY isn't because of its effectivity. Generally, these kinds of small groups have, some difficulty like putting their work out there and just making kind of the most obvious impact a work of art or whatever has. But there's also like the obvious advantage to it that we really didn't want to dispense with, which is that like in small communities, theories can form and kind of like communal insights can form, but also you can like test out strange, and maybe like unorthodox ideas that like certainly if we were as visible as a Guardian piece all the time, we could never ever try out. It would be impossible. So I hate to repeat myself, but it is also again a kind of fine line. And it's been difficult to cross.
I think it also relates to like a kind of optimism and need for revival of institutions. Maybe not the Guardian, but having a piece in the Guardian is an arm of that, because we're not trying to be like renegades. Like I think there's a tendency, like when you're used to interfacing with like direct action focused art collectives, that like no, we're like the problems really get solved on the fringes and the minority, and it's also the place of the most vitality. And I think what I would say to that is like it's the place of the most vitality, but it doesn't have to be closed off.
Okay, thank you.
How big is the group? And it really reminds me of the French salons in the. Depending on how big it is, of course, but it would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on having such a public medium to use as a smaller, more private, more private space to indeed, like Margo said, test out ideas. How do you? So how big is the group, and how do you yourself? Are there many others? Do you compare yourself in any way to, for example, the movement of French salons?
Sjef, would you be able to reiterate the question? The connection was a little choppy there, so I don't think I.
Oh, right. Okay, so the question was, how big is our group? Because this audience member saw like a connection to like the French salons where artists would get together. Like, do we see ourselves a bit as that, as you mentioned, testing out ideas?
I think part of the fun is that we don't know how far our kingdom reaches. I will never tell you how many of us there are.
Yeah, it's because everything is like multi-leveled. I mean, I think in like a French salon or something, there is, like Gertrude Stein's house and Picasso's house, but then there's the actual like, presentations of the artwork and the kind of like workshops or whatever where people were learning from each other. So you had like the inner circle and then the kind of like affinity groups and then the public. It is because of the internet and the existence of group chats and cliques and things like that, and also the existence of like mass sort of non-art world audiences, so much more granular and confusing nowadays. Like, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the Discord, and a percentage of them participates, and there's a percentage of people plus a bunch of outsiders who look at the meme pages. And then, because meme pages, obviously, unlike a discrete painting or sculpture or something like that, can be easily reappropriated and spread anywhere by anyone who has a computer. I mean, the impact and audience are kind of impossible to trace. So many of these ideas, like we were talking about, are sort of like collectively sourced. It really is hard to point to like the discrete producer or even the discrete community. So it is an incredibly granular and like amorphous, which is part of what makes it so exciting.
It is really exciting. And I mean, like, if you're asking to be kind of like, I can let you in a little bit and say like, we have a limited and private reading group, and it's done online and we do it over Zoom. But the really like the generative aspect is the fact that like, okay, everyone, everyone that we've chosen who's put in the work and come to the reading group, and then the chat is going the whole time. So we're having these like productive intellectual discussions at the same time that the chat is going, and like, like the memes are being made like in real time, and that was kind of a great innovation for us, and kind of also leads to the like, the difficulty to point at just who's creating this, because like it's the way Zoom is formatted like allows us to come up with these inside jokes that trickle down everywhere.
All right, I think, anyone else with a question, or is that, I think that's about it. Well, thank you so much for your presentation on the community, the blog, the platform, all that is DNR. And well, thanks everyone here in the audience for coming and staying this late, watching all our intellectual internet culture discourse. So yeah, I hope to see you next week at the Kunstnacht, and yeah, check out Do Not Research.